Now, like Ms. Kavanaugh, would you get on this side, stay where you are, please?
Don't I know you from somewhere?
Well, attorneys from the Legal Defense Fund, as well as attorneys here in Montgomery and in Alabama, are preparing petitions for the Pardon and Parole Board, as well as habeas corpus and other actions in the federal courts. So we're expecting to see the momentum pick up in terms of both Pardon and Parole Board and court proceedings. There's no question but what they are unjustly imprisoned, and we are anxious to see them return home and have their citizenship rights restored. He's talking about eliminating programs that will affect some 1,200,000 students in this country with millions of dollars. He's talking about reducing programs that affect even more. And I'm afraid, at least the educators tell me, that this means a number of small private colleges may have to close. It means that teachers will lose their job, and both students and teachers will join the growing ranks of the unemployed. And I think it's time for Congress to exercise some leadership in this country to hold back the Reaganomics, which is threatening to totally disrupt not only the economy, but the psychology and the spirituality of this country. I think it's time for the American people to say to their congressional representatives, enough is enough. The trickle-down theory.
I've worked on my swing for like a year. I took a year off, and the driving range is so different than the golf course. You have to really think, you have to, position yourself plus swing. So these tournaments just let me get the experience and make mistakes like today and just learn from experience, basically.
How are you doing money-wise?
I've made way over my expenses. I'm fine money-wise. I've got good sponsors, so I have no money problems at all. And it just gives me a chance to relax and just play.
Alabama faces perhaps the biggest game of its basketball history this Friday night in Raleigh, North Carolina. The Crimson Tide must face #1 and NCAA tournament favorite North Carolina in the semifinals of the Eastern Regionals. Although Alabama is a decided underdog, they are entering this game on a wave of momentum, which includes the Southeastern Conference Tournament Championship and last Sunday's NCAA tournament win over St. John's. All were big victories on the road, and this makes Tide coach Wimp Sanderson feel a little better in his preparation for the top-ranked Tar Heels.
Well, I don't think it'll hurt us any to have gone into Lexington and beaten a good Kentucky team on their home floor and then beaten St. John's in what was very similar to their home floor. Sometimes you lose your momentum, but I feel comfortable that we're playing, or we did play in the tournament anyway, as bad as well as we could play. At St. John's, we lacked some, but we got by.
Well, the key to us playing success on the road in the last games we played on the road is because when we got down, we didn't let the crowd bother us. We didn't let it intimidate us. We came back with poise and made our shot that we needed to make.
They're playing again close to their home, and they are considered the #1 team in the nation, and they have two great players in Worth and Perkins. But hopefully our 5 guys can play well against their 5 guys, and we can come out of North Carolina with a win and get one step closer to New Orleans.
Meanwhile, in Chapel Hill, the Tar Heels aren't quite sure what to expect from Alabama, but guard Matt Doherty says he expects a tough game.
They beat Kentucky at Kentucky, ended that 30-game winning streak, beat Georgia 3 times fairly easily. Real strong up front. They hit the boards, I think, the best of anybody in the country. So it's a great challenge for us.
Alabama and North Carolina will tip it off from Raleigh Friday night at 8:35. The game will be televised live locally. The winner will advance to the Eastern Finals on Sunday. Reporting from Tuscaloosa, Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
The first witness was Dawn P. She was a runaway and had disciplinary problems at her home in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Now, since she's been at the Bethesda home, Dawn says she's been saved. Throughout her testimony today, Dawn often referred to her love of Jesus Christ. Dawn says she plans to stay at the home, quote, if God wants me to. She also says she's staying because Jesus is there. During cross-examination, Dawn was asked what would happen if the judge put restrictions on the home, like taking away the Bible and disciplinary measures. Dawn tearfully turned to Judge Myron Thompson and said, I pray he won't. Dawn also testified that the girls won't learn without discipline. She listed several reasons for being paddled, including cursing, singing rock and roll songs, and running away. Dawn testified she's seen the buttocks of one girl who'd been punished. She described it as black and blue.
The second witness of the day was Dr. John Hyde. He's examined the 25 girls at the home. He says he found no evidence of child abuse and that all the girls were well adjusted to their environment.
Dr. Hyde testified he was aware that officials at the home paddled the girls. He said paddling was a necessary policy. The girls received licks on their buttocks, which Dr. Hyde says is a good, well-protected place. Dr. Hyde described the home as a Christian place. He says the girls' diet is adequate and their health physically and psychologically is good. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Federal Courthouse. Defense attorneys were expected to present two mothers and their daughters who've attended the home. Earlier today, Dawn P., who attends the home, took the stand. Dawn says she plans to stay there for as long as God wants her to. She said girls are disciplined if they curse, sing rock and roll songs, or run away. She's seen girls paddled. She described the buttocks of one girl as black and blue. But Dawn agrees with paddling because she says the girls won't learn without discipline. Dawn says if the Bible were taken out of Bethesda, she would not stay. Also today, Dr. John Hyde, who's examined 25 girls at the Bethesda home, says all were in good health physically and psychologically. He says 9 girls had bruises on their buttocks and back. Dr. Hyde testified they received the marks from tangling with other girls in the dorm. Dr. Hyde says he agrees with paddling. He called it a necessary policy. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Federal Courthouse.
Yes. Oh, I just love it. He preaches with those intellectual things. You want me to answer the phone? This is real. It was something that I was surprised. She's not going just yet. I'd like to know how you respond to those terms.
And between what I say and a statement called reaffirmation heritage, you would see the
Gail Phelps was sentenced to 5 years in prison for not removing her child from an abusive situation. David Phelps was the child's stepfather and the man convicted of murdering young Jamie Phelps. Willie James Chesson admitted to slapping his girlfriend's baby, punishment that led to the infant's death. 3 child abuse murder cases, all tried within the last 4 months, all defendants going to jail. District Attorney Jimmy Evans says most abusive parents were abused children. Gail Phelps is a prime example. But Evans says in many cases where a child or spouse is abused, the victims feel guilty and never report the problem, especially in a sexual abuse situation. Evans says when his office does prosecute, it's often not enough.
We can protect and we can deter, but we need outside facilities and community support by way of shelter services and counseling and guidance to make the total criminal justice system work in those areas, because it has not worked and will not work absent those facilities.
The shelters provide a place for abused spouses and children to go to live temporarily, receive counseling, and get help rearranging their lives when abuse wrecks the family unit. District Attorney Jimmy Evans says if the shelters close because of lack of funding, it would be tragic, because he says the courts can't solve all of the problems. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Agriculture Day is a nationwide program of education and celebration of agriculture's contribution to American life. This year the program is being celebrated with a week-long schedule of activities that will carry over into the weekend. Agriculture is the nation's #1 industry with assets of $1.1 trillion. However, the past 5 years have seen some 5,000 to 6,000 Alabama farmers leave agribusiness for other jobs, mainly due to decreasing profits and higher interest rates. Executive Director of the Alabama Farm Bureau, John Dorrell, back from a meeting in Washington earlier this week, says he's optimistic about the future of agriculture and is hopeful the Reagan administration's farm bills will bring some relief to the farming community. Dorrell says officials gave encouraging news of expanded exports.
In fact, Secretary Ling, Deputy Secretary, now said to us that they were putting forth extra efforts in expanding foreign trade, and this is a hopeful sign. And also the FMHA is doing everything they can to keep farmers in business in Alabama and throughout the nation. We met with the National Director of the Farmers Home Administration, and Mr. Ritchie was up there to give our people and Mr. Schumann an up-to-date report on the situation in Alabama, and we are encouraged that they too are doing everything they can to help farmers stay in business during these troubled times.
Each year, agriculture is the nation's #1 exporter. Mac Carmack, WSFA TV News.
If the budget the Senate passed today is endorsed by the House later, the state will spend $1.460 billion for education next year. That's about the same amount Governor James recommended be spent, but there are some marked differences. The most notable is, of course, the difference in teacher pay raises. The governor's proposal offered 14% higher salaries, and the Senate version passed today offers 16% more pay. The Senate made room for the larger increases in several ways. For one, the Senate's version spends more money in salaries on about 130 fewer teachers than does the governor's proposed budget. That reduction in teachers came from revised figures from the Department of Education that weren't available when the governor first drafted his budget. Secondly, the Senate also used about $8 million originally intended for the Department of Youth Services. The Senate didn't entirely cut out DYS. They've included wording that would give DYS the $8 million if taxes grow enough next year to afford it. Most of the changes in the Senate version were made Tuesday in the Senate Finance and Taxation Committee. The full Senate today spent no more than 15 minutes on the budget before voting 33-0 in favor of it. Lieutenant Governor George McMillan said some House aspects of the budget were included to make it more enticing for the 105-member House to approve the Senate version. This education budget will be before the House Tuesday when they reconvene. They'll be faced with the option of agreeing to the budget, which would send it down to the governor for his final signature, or disagreeing and setting up a conference committee to hammer out any differences. This would be the first time in a number of years that an education budget faces a final vote with more than a third of the session remaining. Earlier, Senator Ryan DeGraffenreid of Tuscaloosa rallied his colleagues into approving a bill that would pay retired teachers at least $1 a month more for each year of active service, and if the retirement system can handle it, as much as $2 a month more per active year of service. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Government, he's gonna have to get out and raise money. We just kill it. Just kill it. Wait a minute. What you taking me on for?
They had hoped to get in the final 36 holes of the tournament today, but wet conditions and fog at Rolling Hills forced the tee-off time back 2 hours this morning to 9:30. Wet grounds also played havoc with the scores. The best card of the day was a 1 over par 73. But surviving the adversity and hanging on to the lead was former University of Texas golfer Debbie Patrizzi, who finished the day with this putt for par on 18 that left her at even par 146 through the second round.
Are you pleased with a round of 75 today?
Considering the way I started, yes. I was 3 over after the first 2 holes, and I birdied 3 holes in a row on the front side, which brought me back to even. So considering the way I started, I was satisfied.
What about the wet conditions? Bother you that much?
No, you just got to learn to play with it. You know, everybody else is playing in the same conditions, so that's all you can do.
Tomorrow, the final round. Can you hold on?
Well, I'm going to do what I can. I want to win just as much as anybody else.
2 strokes behind Patrizzi at 148 for the tournament is Springfield, Illinois native Sarah Levecki. She could have pulled within 1 shot of the lead had she sunk this putt for birdie. But as you can see, it rolled just to the left of the cup. Frances Anne-Marie Pauley is in third. She's 6 strokes off the pace. Third and final round play begins bright and early tomorrow morning at 7:30. The leaders are scheduled to tee off at 9 o'clock. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Defense attorneys were expected to present 2 mothers and their daughters who've attended the home. Earlier today, Dawn P., who attends the home, took the stand. Dawn says she plans to stay there for as long as God wants her to. She said girls are disciplined if they curse, sing rock and roll songs, or run away. She's seen girls paddled. She described the buttocks of one girl as black and blue. But Dawn agrees with paddling because she says the girls won't learn without discipline. Dawn says if the Bible were taken out of Bethesda, she would not stay. Also today, Dr. John High, who's examined 25 girls at the Bethesda home, says all were in good health physically and psychologically. He says 9 girls had bruises on their buttocks and back. Dr. High testified they received the marks from tangling with other girls in the dorm. Dr. High says he agrees with paddling. He called it a necessary policy. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Federal Courthouse.
Dr. Miller, Elbright, Kenneth Faye, Robert Sauer, Hugh Martin, and Howard Smith. So we want to thank you fellows for the job. I can read it after Cal opens the box.
And that's in quotation marks because she really is a young lady. And I'd like to move down to the microphone there just a moment.
recently had a situation where a small child had been abused sexually by her natural father, and this had been done with the knowledge of the mother, or at least with such knowledge that would give a reasonable and prudent person that would conclude that it was happening. She and the little girl was of the opinion that she just felt like that all daddies did all these things to little girls, and she couldn't understand why the police were interested and why the prosecutor's office was interested. The mother took a position that she would rather live with the sexually abusing father, the person who had been abusing her daughter, would rather continue in a marital relationship and live there and allow this thing to happen to her child than to separate. And so the little girl wound up feeling like she had betrayed two people that she loved very much, her father and her mother. And without shelter services, you can just about predict what's going to happen in those cases.
The Sunshine Center provides a place for children to go for counseling. The domestic abuse shelter provides a place for women and their children to go to live temporarily, in some cases, when they're being abused at home. Evans says without a place for these women to go, the cycle of abuse would most likely continue. He says if a woman swears out a warrant against her husband for abuse, he may be arrested, but he'll be able to make bond within minutes. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Well, you know, Norman Ankrum is a very fine basketball player, and Sampson is a fine player. And again, at this stage of play, you're going to see good players on both teams.
Of course, everybody knows about Sampson, but the situation on Wilson at this point, we notice he did not work out today.
Othell is going to play about like he did against Tennessee. He will not be able to work out at all, but he'll try to play in the games.
Early in the game, the combination of Randy Brewer and Trent Tucker moved Minnesota out front. The 7'3" Brewer was dominating inside, 2 of his 14 first-half points on that nice move. Tucker was hot from the perimeter. He had 12 in the first half. That shot from the key gave the Gophers a 7-point lead midway through the opening frame. Louisville fought back to tie it, though. Charles Jones was the spark off the bench. This bucket with the assist from Rodney McRae knotted the score at 25. Milt Wagner's shot at the buzzer then put the Cardinals up by 1 at halftime. Denny Crum called on Lancaster Gordon in the second half. The senior responded with a game-high 23, 2 there on the dunk off the break. Louisville up by 5 early in the second half. They led by as much as 10. Derek Smith added 17 for the Cardinals, 2 there on that beautiful baseline drive to the hoop that draws the foul. Brewer led the Gophers with 19, but he had only 5 in the second half. Louisville goes on to beat Minnesota 67-61. The Cardinals now play the UAB Virginia winner in the Mideast Finals on Saturday. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports. Alabama faces perhaps the biggest game of its basketball history this Friday night in Raleigh, North Carolina. The Crimson Tide must face #1 and NCAA tournament favorite North Carolina in the semifinals of the Eastern Regionals. Although Alabama is a decided underdog, they are entering this game on a wave of momentum, which includes the Southeastern Conference Tournament Championship and last Sunday's NCAA tournament win over St. John's. All were big victories on the road, and this makes Tide coach Wimp Sanderson feel a little better in his preparation for the top-ranked Tar Heels.
Well, I don't think it'll hurt us any to have gone into Lexington and beaten a good Kentucky team on their home floor and then beaten St. John's in what was very similar to their home floor. Sometimes you you know, you lose your momentum, but I feel comfortable that we're playing, or we did play in the tournament anyway, as well as we could play. At St. John's, we relaxed some, but we got back.
Well, the key to us playing successful on the road in the last games we played on the road is because when we got down, we didn't let the crowd bother us. We didn't let it intimidate us. We came back with poise and made our shot that we needed to make.
They're playing again close to their home, and they are considered the #1 team in the nation, and they have two great players in Word and Perkins. But hopefully our 5 guys can play well against their 5 guys, and we can come out of North Carolina with a win and get one step closer to New Orleans.
Meanwhile, in Chapel Hill, the Tar Heels aren't quite sure what to expect from Alabama, but guard Matt Doherty says he expects a tough game.
They beat Kentucky at Kentucky, ended that 30-game winning streak, beat Georgia 3 times fairly easily. Real strong up front. They hit the boards, I think, the best of anybody in the country. So it's a great challenge for us.
Alabama and North Carolina will tip it off from Raleigh Friday night at 8:35. The game will be televised live locally. The winner will advance to the Eastern Finals on Sunday. Reporting from Tuscaloosa, Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Let's just go close.
Okay.
Here is an exploration of to find out if there is any common ground that we can come to. We would ask this company to show the people of the state, the ratepayers, that they too can have some compassion, that they can tighten their belts and get by on less than what they've said they can get by on. I think it's absolutely necessary. There is a breaking point of where these rates can go to, and I think we're fastly approaching that. We've talked about a new concept in rate making, which would maybe phase some small increases of rates over a period of years. But any decision or any settlement would have to include, in my opinion, that the company take this new filing back to Birmingham with them and tear it up. And also that they keep themselves out of this commission for at least the next 2 years.
And the evils it spawns. Their position on this vital issue has been drinking. Chasing after loose women causes our, and those policies certainly merit your continued support. I thank you. It's a law that discourages union officials from behaving like arrogant dictators. The right to work law empowers rank and file dues-paying members to control and police their own unions. Acting individually or collectively, they can restrain their leaders by threatening to resign from a union and stop paying monthly dues to it.
Representatives from Air South sent a message to Delta yesterday saying the airline will temporarily suspend service, but for how long was uncertain. Air South is a Mobile-based airline that provides service to Birmingham and New Orleans. Earlier today, Airport Director Ken Muse said he hadn't heard from the airline and didn't know what was going on. But later, he did get a message from Air South's president.
I called Mr. Sam Clark of the regional CAB office, Civil Aeronautics Board office in Atlanta this afternoon, about an hour ago. Talked to Sam, and Sam advised me that he had talked to Mr. Hendrickson, who is president of Air South. And Mr. Hendrickson has assured him that as of Monday, the 22nd of March, normal service will resume. Now, why they stopped, I do not know.
There's a lot of speculation surrounding Air South's temporary suspension of service. Some say one of the company's major financial contributors backed out, but supposedly the company was able to make up the financial deficit in New York. I was unable to contact Air South's president to find out if that's true. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The winner's name is Jennifer Green, a 13-year-old from Hope Hall. Jennifer, along with students from 25 other public and private schools in the Montgomery area, began the competition at 9:30. 2.5 hours later, the spelling bee was over, and Jennifer was the winner. She won by spelling the word embezzlement. The runner-up in the competition was Paul Mazik, a 6th grader from Montgomery Academy. Jennifer, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Marshall Green, received a certificate of merit and a check to cover her expenses to the state championship to be held in Birmingham in April. This year marks the 25th consecutive year that the Veterans of Foreign Wars have sponsored the county-wide spelling contest. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
If the final budget is passed in this form, then we will have 2 beautiful, white, shiny prisons in the Birmingham area that won't have any inmates in them. We cannot staff them. We will not have operational funds to feed and clothe the inmates. And that's really the bottom line if the budget's passed in this form. The 14 members of the House Ways and Means Committee and the members of the Huntsville Legislative Delegation were invited to watch the launch. Jim Simpson, University of Alabama at Huntsville Public Relations Officer, says the invitation to the legislators came as a result of a desire by the entire community of Huntsville to show the legislators not only the launch of the space shuttle and Huntsville's part in that program, but also the rest of the high technology industry that makes up such an important part of Huntsville's economic base. The tab for the one-day trip is being picked up by private business, which will fly the legislators down in a private jet and bring them back the same day. Those private businesses don't want to identify themselves, according to Simpson, but it could be almost assumed that they are part of the high-technology industry in Huntsville. While Simpson says the trip won't cost UAH or the state one dime, the university is strongly backing the trip. For some time, UAH has been struggling for additional funding from the legislature to develop their high-technology programs at the university, something Simpson says is critical in providing the right type of graduates for not only the space, but the electronic and computer industries in Huntsville. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Former University of Texas All-American Debbie Patrizi fought the stiff winds in a gallant try from Sarah Levesque to hold on for the one-stroke win in the finals of the Alabama Open at the Rolling Hills Golf and Racket Club. Patrizi was sailing along with a 3-stroke lead on the 14th hole when she sailed one into the lake and lost 2 shots to Levesque. But the Illinois native bogeyed the 14th and remained 2 shots behind Patrizi. Debbie said she was lucky to come out alive after that disastrous hole.
I just said don't worry about it. You still got a couple of shots on them. And you have a lot of holes left. You have a couple of birdie holes, so just hang in there.
When did you feel you had this one wrapped up?
On 17, when I looked up at the leaderboard and I saw I was leading by 3, I figured, well, you know, if I bogey and Sarah birdies, then I'll win by 1. So that's when I figured I had it wrapped up.
But things will get a little tight on 18. With Patrizi leading by 3, Levesque birdied the hole with this nice putt. Patrizi then missed a putt for par, but she tapped in a short one for a tournament total of 222, 3 over par, a 1-stroke win, and a $1,500 first prize. Catherine Patton of England finished 3rd, 4 strokes back, and Marie Pauli of France and Mary Heifman of Florida tied for 4th, 6 shots behind the leader. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
It'll be the football state versus the basketball state as Alabama tries to tie a school record for victories in a season against top-ranked North Carolina Friday night. The Tar Heels here in white had to fight for their lives against unsung James Madison in round 1 last weekend before eventually winning 52-50, while Alabama, also in white, led St. John's by 12 before falling behind by 4 and then coming back to win by 1, 69-68. Alabama will be led by forward Eddie Phillips, number 51. He's the team's leading scorer and rebounder, and it was his shot that beat Kentucky in the SEC tournament. Teams that have beaten Alabama this year have done so by stopping Phillips. The Tide last played North Carolina in 1976, also in the NCAA tournament, and Alabama won that game 79-64, but Bama has never advanced past the semifinal round of a regional tournament.
7'4" Ralph Sampson helped Virginia to an early 3-point lead by dominating the middle on both ends of the court, but Alabama Birmingham got hot, and when Donnie Spear was fouled on the slam dunk, the Blazers had a 7-point lead. Back came Virginia, going ahead on Sampson's tip-in just before the half. Oliver Robinson got 17 of his game-high 23 points in the second half, including this jumper to put Alabama Birmingham up by 2. When Norm Ankrum drew the foul from Sampson, the Blazers were ahead for good. Alabama Birmingham, the 68-66 winner, they'll play the Louisville Cardinals, who wore down Minnesota last night on hot shooting by Lancaster Gordon, 23 points. Minnesota enjoyed the early momentum, John Wiley going behind the back to Trent Tucker for 2 of his 22, but the second half belonged to Louisville. Derek Smith on the steal gave the Cardinals a 5-point lead. Gary Holmes tied it for Minnesota with less than 10 minutes to play, but Gordon went inside to put Louisville ahead for good. Final 67-61, the Mid-East Regional Final is at Birmingham Saturday.
Well, I think not letting them get the momentum offensively and kind of keep the momentum on our bench and playing sound defense ourselves and rebounding.
What about the 4 corners? Are you worried they might spread it?
Well, no use me worrying about it. If they're ahead at some part of the game, I'm sure they will. But I'm not, not a whole lot we can do about that. It's just try to be as sound as we can defensively.
We have a lot of critical thinking that's very cognitive in nature. We have problem solving on these playgrounds. We have a lot of tremendous amount of language development that takes place. Play basically is the medium for children's learning. They learn through interaction with their environment, and we're supplying a lot of environment for them to interact with.
Railroad employees invest part of their paychecks each month in a retirement system. The company matches the contribution. That money is managed by a federal agency, the Railroad Retirement Board. President Reagan wants to abolish the board and put the retirement money under the Social Security Administration. These rail workers in Mobile and their counterparts across the country don't want that to happen. The president says money would be saved by abolishing and defederalizing the board. Employees argue they pay for the board, not the federal government. That Uncle Sam wouldn't gain by Reagan's action, but workers would stand to lose by placing their money in the hands of an already shaky agency. George Barnes retired after 40 years with the railroad.
And by abolishing this board, under the Tier 1, which is the one that already retired, it would put 1 million more people on Social Security, which is already overburdened.
And you're afraid you might not get some of your money that you paid in?
If I didn't get it, I don't know whether I'll live long enough to get it.
Travis Lee has been with the railroad for 25 years and is still far from retirement.
I'm concerned that what he's going to do is put this in with Social Security and then later on drop our benefits to what Social Security's benefits is when we're paying possibly twice as much as Social Security.
Nationwide, over 1 million rail workers from management ranks and 20 unions will be affected by the president's plan. Those employees will lobby hard to block Reagan's proposal and have already received the backing of some pro-labor congressmen.
They would be taking a privilege away from an individual citizen that are law-abiding and that try to do right. And I don't see how they could make any restrictions at all except the way that it is right now.
That's what Montgomery gun enthusiast and collector W.M. Gunter has to say about Watkins' proposed gun control plan. And Gunter's opinion is echoed by many of the 300 or so exhibitors at the Montgomery Civic Center today for the Central Alabama Gun Club Gun and Knife Show. And Watkins says it's also the general public reaction he's been hearing to his proposals to ban both possession and sales of handguns in Montgomery. Watkins introduced the plan in the Montgomery City Council a week and a half ago. Since that time, Watkins says he has heard much criticism of the plan, enough to make him say, again, the plan is open to change.
A compromise version of both ordinances could pass the council. I haven't seen a compromise, or I don't know if anybody is yet ready to offer a compromise. So until that happens, or unless that happens, I'm perfectly prepared to push through both of my ordinances.
But pushing it through the council will take more than one council member, and Watkins says he doesn't know where the majority of the council stands on his plan. He says he has talked with 2 council members who are, as Watkins says, not opposed to his plan. But even if the majority of the council does vote against Watkins' gun control ordinances, he says it won't be the end.
Now, I'll keep pushing it through for as long as I'm on the council because I believe it's a legitimate solution, not a perfect solution, but a legitimate solution to the rising crime problem, not only here in Montgomery, but throughout the country.
Watkins suggests some possible compromises might not outlaw handguns entirely, but might place much stricter requirements on who can own handguns. But even Watkins says the gun control plan in its current form wouldn't work in just any city. He says Montgomery has a good police force as well as state trooper headquarters readily available to provide enough protection for area citizens. So tomorrow we'll talk with the chief of the Montgomery Police Department to see what he thinks of gun control for Montgomery. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
69-year-old Lloyd Howard, a resident of Thorsby, Alabama in Chilton County, was 19 when this series of tornadoes struck on that fateful day of March 21st, 1932. He has a vivid memory about that day.
It rained awful heavy that afternoon, and clouds were low and flying. It rained like everything. And it had already gotten dark when the storm hit. And when I heard that roar, I knew there was something bad wrong. And Mama said, well, that's a tornado. And sure enough, it sure was a big one.
Howard still has a copy of a local newspaper that recorded the events and told of the number of people who had been killed. In Chilton County alone, more than 50 persons lost their lives. Howard says his family was very lucky because the tornado that came through Thorsby did very little damage to their home. But he says others were not so lucky.
I knew several of the people, and I knew of quite a few of them, but not personally acquainted. But I did know quite a few of the relatives of a lot of them that were killed.
The final death toll was 268, with 1,850 injured. The killer storm destroyed 7,000 homes in its path, which stretched from Marengo County in southwest Alabama to Jackson County in the northeastern part of the state. Howard remembers some unbelievable occurrences. One was an instance in which he says a 6-month-old baby was picked up by a tornado and carried a mile away, but left without a scratch. Howard says a week later, just when residents were cleaning up from the storm, another one hit, on March 27th, Easter Sunday. This rare photograph was taken by a motorist who had come to see the damage from the previous twister. The second storm killed 8 persons and injured more than 50. Howard says he'll never forget the awesome destruction that was left behind, and says he hopes he won't ever have to experience anything like that again.
Consider yourself lucky?
Very lucky, very lucky. That's for sure.
From Thorsby, Alabama, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Gene Bartow saw Louisville outscore his Blazers 13-4 in the final few minutes of the first half to trail by 8 at halftime. But Norman Ankrum and Chris Giles got UAB back in it. Ankrum scoring here inside with the assist from Nicholas made it 42-38 Louisville. And when Giles nailed this jumper, the Blazers grabbed the lead at 46-44. But Denny Crum relied heavily on his bench, and they responded, especially Charles Jones. The sophomore center scored a career-high 19 points off the bench, including this bucket inside, and he was fouled. Rodney McCray played a steady game for the Cardinals. With this stuff off the steal, Louisville took a 56-54 lead, and they never trailed again. Oliver Robinson kept UAB close. He led the Blazers with 20, most from long range like that. But down the stretch, Louisville would win it at the foul line. They hit 11 of 12 from the charity stripe in the second half, Jones getting 7 of those. Denny Crum has his Cardinals in the Final Four for the 4th time with a 75-68 win over UAB. They now face Georgetown, which destroyed Oregon State in the West Regional at Provo, Utah. It was complete dominance by John Thompson's squad. Big Pat Ewing, too much for the Beavers inside. He had 13 points, 2 there on the nice hook. Eric Sleepy Floyd paced Georgetown with 22. He scores there in the lane. The Hoyas set a new NCAA tournament record, shooting 71% from the field. One of the few bright spots for Ralph Miller's Beavers was this steal by All-American Lester Connor, who takes it all the way for the bucket. But they were never in it. Georgetown beats Oregon State 69-45 to win the West. The Hoyas make their first trip to the Elite Final Four. In the early going, it looked like it might be a runaway for the top-ranked Tar Heels. When Matt Doherty cans this one from way out, Carolina led it 10-4. But Alabama fought back to keep it close. Eddie Phillips leading the way. The senior slam dunk here cut the Tar Heel lead to 2. Sam Perkins showed the Crimson Tide some good inside moves of his own. This jam propelled North Carolina to a 41-36 halftime lead. In the second half, Bama made their move. Phillips, who led the Tide with 16, cut the lead to 3 with this one. Bobby Lee Hurt with 12 cut it to 2 with that good inside move. And Eric Richardson gave Bama their only tie of the game at 45 when he hits this bomb. But foul trouble would spell the Tide's doom. All 3 of Wimp Sanderson's big men, Phillips, Hurt, and Philip Lockett, fouled out. With the Tide in foul trouble, the Tar Heels went to work inside with Perkins and James Worthy. That's Worthy with a good move inside, 2 of his 15 points. Perkins, Worthy, and Doherty shared high point honors for North Carolina. But the difference in the game came from the foul line. North Carolina converted 26 of 31. Alabama made 11, after only 16 trips to the charity stripe. Dean Smith and the Tar Heels beat Alabama 74-69. They face Villanova for the East Regional Final tomorrow. Villanova led this seesaw battle early. They went up 7 points midway through the first half when Jim Milliken scores here inside and draws the foul. The three-point play made it 28-21. Bobby Parks kept Memphis State close. This nice bank shot pulled the Tigers within 3 close to the end of the half, and Dana Kirk likes what he sees. The Tigers' quickness of the second half will get them back in it. When Mike Haynes scores here off the fast break, Memphis State took the lead at 37-36. John Pannone was tough for the Wildcats inside. He had 14 points, 2 there off the tap in. Keith Lee was equal to the task for Memphis State. That's him with a slam. He later fouled out with 12 points. When Pannone muscles this one inside, the game is tied at 62, and we go into overtime. In the overtime period, Villanova with a 2-point lead, and Stuart Granger converts this crucial 1-and-1 to put the Wildcats up 70-66. That's how it ends. Villanova meets the Alabama-North Carolina winner in the Eastern Finals on Sunday. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Dr. S.J. Selikoff is a Montgomery physician who specializes in allergies. He says the culprits behind the current outpouring of pollen are trees.
Flowers don't do very much. You see, the flowers are insect pollinated mainly. Their pollen is heavy, they're attractive, they look good to the insects, and they smell good. And the reason is that they are to transmit the pollen from the male to the female and from one flower to another. On the other hand, the pollen of trees and grasses and other such things, they are very light and are disseminated by wind.
And Dr. Selikoff says there are airborne irritants in our area all year long.
In the spring, it's entirely trees. Then the grasses pick up, and the grasses will cover the same period, only they start in April and May. And down here they go through the whole summer and fall until we get a frost. In August, in the early fall, sometimes the end of July, we get the weeds. Ragweed being the most important, the most common, the goldenrod, and other weeds.
Dr. Selikoff says if you're allergic to pollen from a certain type tree growing in your backyard, don't cut it down. Pollen travels miles in the air, and you'll still get pollen from neighbors' trees, blocks, and even miles away. In fact, he says pollen has been found floating in the ocean 18 miles out to sea. I'm Bob Howell, WSFA TV News.
The gun control plan is the work of District 6 City Councilman Donald Watkins and would, for the most part, forbid Montgomery residents from owning handguns and ban the sale of handguns in the city. Watkins says some sort of control of handguns is needed, and that control could be at least a partial solution to this area's and the nation's problems with crime. But many area gun owners are saying that's not the way it will work out, that Watkins' plans will only prevent citizens from protecting themselves, while the criminals will still be able to get guns. And local law enforcement officials are also taking shots at Watkins' plan. Montgomery Police Chief Charles Swindle says gun control is not the solution.
For us to be naive enough to think that the criminal element in this city or any other city would turn in their weapons because of a city ordinance, I just don't think we can be that naive.
Watkins has said many Montgomery residents have a frontier mentality when it comes to guns. Swindle says that's not true, and he thinks there is a bleeding heart mentality in the courts across the nation in favor of criminals. Watkins says his plan is wide open to compromise. Swindle says his stance is not.
I think that the compromise that ought to be made is that the courts and the people of this community tell criminals swiftly and with a lot of justice, you go into the penitentiary for the crimes you've committed, and they stay there until their time has been served. I think that's the compromise we ought to draw.
Both sides of the gun control issue will meet each other for a showdown in the council chambers Tuesday night. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Accused criminals are guaranteed certain constitutional rights. They have a right to an attorney if they can't afford one. They have a right to appeal, and they also have a right to sit in the courtroom during the entire court proceeding. While the criminal is assured of those rights, the victim is not. And that is what Montgomery County District Attorney Jimmy Evans and other law enforcement officials want changed.
We hope to achieve some public awareness and to alert leaders the plight of the victim in Alabama and to call for legislative reform insofar as the victim is concerned, with a view toward presenting positive legislation and having someone help with that legislation.
Evans says legislative reform for victims in Alabama is something that has been needed for a long time.
This will be the first united law enforcement conference in this area, and it is something that's needed. The victim of a crime under Alabama law is virtually isolated from the very system that's designed to protect her.
Evans contends that if the state can help convicted felons, it can also help victims and their families.
If we can send prisoners to rehabilitation centers and give them education and buy their textbooks for them, certainly we can take the children of a crime victim who has done nothing and help them some in their economic situation.
The conference is expected to draw court and law enforcement officials from all over the state and will be held from 1 to 5 p.m. at the Montgomery Civic Center on Wednesday. It will be open to the public. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
March 15th, when all three major networks, CNN and the Republican National Party, wanted coverage of President Reagan's address to the Alabama legislature, they all came to TV 12 News. Our cameras and technicians provided them with continuous live coverage of the president's arrival, his speech to the joint session, and his departure from Maxwell Air Force Base. When Washington and the national news media want to know, they come to us. So should you. TV 12 News. News you can depend on every time.